Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to get into The Obstacle is the Way
Hmm.
by Ryan Holiday.
Oh, yeah.
So we've got some excerpts from the book, and we're going to kind of try to break down these three disciplines that Ryan Holiday talks about, perception, action, and will.
Cool. Yeah. The obstacle is the way. It's a classic for a reason, right? It
Yeah.
really resonates with people who have ever felt stuck.
Yeah, yeah.
And it really goes deeper than just positive thinking, I think.
Right.
There's a real depth to how he breaks down these disciplines.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to start with perception. And the book kind of dives right in and says,
Mhm.
perception is how we see and understand what occurs around us and what we decide those events will mean. Our perceptions can be a source of strength or of great weakness.
Mm.
So how do we shift our perceptions to be that source of strength, especially when things get tough?
Yeah. That's the million-dollar question, right? It's easy to say think positive,
Right.
but the book goes way deeper than that. Do you remember that story about John D. Rockefeller during the Panic of 1857?
Yeah, vaguely.
Everyone else was, losing their minds, but Rockefeller kept his cool.
Yeah.
He didn't just see chaos, he saw a chance to learn.
Right. So picture this. You're a young John D. Rockefeller, just kind of starting out in the world of finance, and bam.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest economic crisis the country's ever seen hits.
Yeah.
Most people would panic, but not Rockefeller. He actually saw the crisis as this opportunity to study the market to figure out how to navigate the chaos. And that, as the book argues, became a key factor in his success.
Yeah, it's kind of like Warren Buffett's famous line, be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. It's that ability to step back from the emotional roller coaster and see the bigger picture and look for those contrarian opportunities.
Right, and that's where things get really interesting because the book argues that this isn't just about being smart. It's about training your perception. It's about being objective, controlling those knee-jerk emotional responses, and even finding the good in a bad situation.
Yeah, it's easier said than done though, right?
Totally.
We're kind of wired for those fight or flight responses.
Yeah.
How do we actually train ourselves to stay calm and see things clearly when the pressure's on?
Well, think about how astronauts prepare for space missions.
Mm.
I mean, they go through these intense simulations. They face all kinds of stressful situations,
Right.
and they learn to manage their fear by repeatedly confronting it.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. They're essentially domesticating their fear, right?
Yeah.
Not pretending it doesn't exist, but learning to work with it to control it rather than letting it control them. And the more they practice, the better they get at it.
Mhm.
Do you think that kind of training could work for us in everyday life?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like building a mental muscle, right?
Yeah.
The more we practice responding to challenges in a calm, objective way, the stronger that muscle becomes.
Right.
But it's not just about astronauts and high-pressure situations. The book also talks about finding that internal strength, even when your external world is crumbling.
Mm-hmm.
Take the story of Reuben Hurricane Carter, for example.
Oh, man.
Wrongfully imprisoned, facing that kind of injustice, you would think it would crush anyone's spirit.
For sure.
But Carter refused to let his circumstances define him. He chose to maintain his mental freedom, his sense of self, even within the confines of prison.
It's incredible, right?
Yeah.
And it reminds me of other figures who faced immense adversity, like, Nelson Mandela or Malcolm X.
Right.
Even in the most challenging circumstances, they found a way to maintain their inner strength. So what does this tell us about perception?
It tells us that we always have a choice in how we react, what we believe, even in the face of extreme adversity.
Yeah.
And that choice, that internal control, is at the heart of this idea of perception as a source of strength.
I like that. I like that a lot.
But, maintaining that kind of inner strength, it's not always easy.
Yeah.
It's easy to get overwhelmed by the little things, right?
Mhm.
To let those daily frustrations get to us. I mean, we're not pioneers facing, life or death struggles every day.
Right.
But the book uses the example of Laura Ingalls Wilder to remind us that resilience is a muscle that we can all build.
That's fascinating how Wilder's pioneer spirit, facing those harsh realities, contrasts with our modern anxieties.
Yeah.
We get stressed over deadlines or traffic jams, things that wouldn't even register on Wilder's scale of challenges. It's a good reminder to keep things in perspective, wouldn't you say?
Totally. It's about separating the objective event from our subjective reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you make a mistake at work, right?
Sure.
Instead of spiraling into self-doubt, you could choose to see it as a learning opportunity.
Yeah,
What went wrong?
right.
What can I do differently?
Exactly. The event itself is neutral, but it's our perception of it that determines whether it's a setback or a stepping stone.
So how can we apply this to our own lives? Let's say you hit a roadblock in your career. What are some practical steps you could take to shift your perception from seeing it as a dead end to seeing it as a detour, maybe even a shortcut to a better path?
That's where things get really interesting because shifting our perception is just the first step.
Right.
Once we've reframed the obstacle, it's time to move into action.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's often the hardest part, right?
Right.
Taking that first step, especially when we feel stuck or uncertain.
Yeah. Yeah, so how do we actually translate that shift in perception into taking action?
Well, it's like that old saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Right.
But what if you don't even know which direction to step in?
Yeah.
That's where the book really shines, because it offers a framework for action, even when things feel really uncertain.
Okay, so where does it start?
Well, it starts with getting moving, right?
Mm.
The book tells this great story about Amelia Earhart, a true pioneer in aviation. I mean, can you imagine the courage it took for a woman in her time to pursue a dream like that?
Well, she faced so many obstacles, societal expectations, limited resources. I mean, the list goes on and on. But she didn't let any of that stop her.
Right, and think about like the context too. Back then, flying was still incredibly dangerous, especially for women. I mean, there were so many reasons to just play it safe to stay grounded.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But Earhart was determined. She even took on jobs that others might have considered, beneath her, just to get closer to her goal, just to gain that experience.
Yeah, it's a great example of how sometimes you need to be willing to take on those less than ideal opportunities, just to gain experience, to build momentum. What do you think is the biggest takeaway from Earhart's story for listeners, people trying to apply these ideas to their own lives?
I think it's about the importance of taking action, even if it's imperfect action.
Hmm.
We can get so caught up in waiting for the perfect conditions, the perfect plan, dotting every I and crossing every T, but we end up just paralyzed by inaction.
Yeah, afraid to take that first step.
Exactly. And Earhart teaches us that it's better to take that first step, even if it's a small one, than to stay stuck in that fear and indecision.
So we've got the perception shift, we've started taking action, but what happens when we inevitably, hit a wall? How do we keep going when things get tough? How do we maintain that momentum?
Well, that's where persistence comes in. And the book has this fascinating story about Erwin Rommel, the desert fox. He was known for his relentless energy and audacity on the battlefield. He kept his opponents constantly off balance with his, relentless forward momentum.
Really?
Yeah. Even when facing seemingly insurmountable odds, Rommel just kept pushing forward.
Wow. So Rommel's story reminds me of a quote from the book. It says, "Don't think about the end. Think about surviving. Making it from meal to meal, break to break, checkpoint to checkpoint, paycheck to paycheck, one day at a time."
Yeah, I love that quote. It's about breaking down those big, overwhelming goals into smaller, more manageable actions. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it's like that idea of the minimum viable product in the startup world. You don't try to build the perfect product right out of the gate.
Right.
You start with a basic version, you get it out there, and then you iterate based on feedback.
Exactly. It's about embracing failure as part of the process.
So true.
Instead of being afraid to make mistakes, you see them as opportunities to learn and improve.
And the book is full of examples of people who persisted through incredible challenges. Ulysses S. Grant, during the Civil War, he faced setback after setback in his campaign to capture Vicksburg. But he just refused to give up, and his persistence ultimately led to a decisive victory that really turned the tide of the war.
It's a powerful reminder that those breakthroughs, those moments of triumph, they often come after a long and arduous journey filled with setbacks and challenges.
Yeah, and then you have Thomas Edison, who famously tested thousands of materials before finding the right filament for the incandescent light bulb.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine the dedication and the resilience it took to keep going after so many failed attempts.
Edison is like the classic example of the power of persistence.
Yeah.
But it's not just about brute force effort, right? The book also talks about the importance of strategy, of finding the right approach for the specific obstacle you are facing.
Right.
Like that story about Samuel Zemere and the land dispute? Instead of getting bogged down in a legal battle with United Fruit, he just found a creative workaround.
What did he do?
He bought the land from both claimants.
Oh, wow.
So he ended up paying twice, but he ultimately secured the land he needed.
That's amazing. I love that.
It's such a great example of thinking outside the box, of finding a solution that others might have overlooked. And it highlights the importance of being adaptable, of being willing to Adjust your approach based on the specific obstacle you're facing.
Right, because sometimes the most direct path isn't always the best path, right? You have to be willing to take a detour to find a workaround, even if it seems counterintuitive.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of the book's discussion of the flank attack, drawing on examples from military history. The idea is that attacking head on is often the least effective strategy.
Right.
Instead, you look for weaknesses, you exploit blind spots, you find a way to outmaneuver your opponent.
So instead of confronting the obstacle head on, you're looking for a way to kind of sidestep it, to outsmart it.
Exactly. It's about being strategic, about using your creativity and resourcefulness to find a way to overcome the obstacle, even if it means taking a less obvious route.
I like that. Okay, so let's bring it back to like a real world example. Let's talk about Richard Wright, the young black man who was denied access to books because of segregation.
Oh, yeah. Powerful story.
Instead of accepting this injustice, he found a way to get those books. He forged a note and used a stolen library card to access the knowledge that was being kept from him.
It's such a powerful example of how resourcefulness and determination can help us overcome even the most systemic obstacles. He refused to be limited by the circumstances he was born into.
And it's like the book says, start thinking like a radical pragmatist. Still ambitious, aggressive, and rooted in ideals, but also eminently practical and guided by the possible.
It's about finding that balance between idealism and pragmatism. You don't abandon your values, but you also recognize that sometimes you have to find a way to work within the system, even if it means bending the rules a bit.
So we've talked about taking action, being persistent, and finding the right approach. But there's one more crucial element to this discipline of action. It's about focusing on the process, on taking those steps, rather than getting bogged down by the end goal.
Right. That's where the book's discussion of Coach Nick Saban's philosophy comes in. Saban, who's known for his incredible success in college football, he emphasizes the importance of the process.
Mm-hmm.
It's about focusing on the present moment, on executing each step with excellence, and not getting distracted by the bigger picture.
Right.
Not getting ahead of yourself.
It's like that quote from the book. Don't think about winning the SEC championship. Don't think about the national championship. Think about what you need to do in this drill, on this play, in this moment. It's about breaking down those big, overwhelming goals into smaller, more manageable actions.
And it's about trusting that if you focus on doing those smaller things well, the bigger goals will take care of themselves. It's a powerful mindset shift, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
So as we move from action into the final discipline, well, I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about willpower or, gritting your teeth and pushing through. It's about cultivating an inner strength that allows us to face challenges with grace and resilience.
Yeah, it's about tapping into a deeper well of strength that goes beyond just, willpower. It's about cultivating an inner resilience that allows us to bend without breaking.
So how do we actually cultivate that kind of will?
Well, the book offers some really interesting examples. Like it talks about presidents Andrew Johnson and James Garfield.
Oh.
Both of them rose from incredibly humble beginnings. Johnson was a tailor, and he took immense pride in the quality of his work, making sure that every stitch was perfect.
Wow.
And Garfield, he worked as a janitor to pay for his education, but he approached even the most menial tasks with enthusiasm and dedication.
It's a pretty fascinating contrast to how a lot of people approach their work today. It's easy to get caught up in titles and status,
Oh, yeah.
to lose sight of the importance of doing our best, regardless of the task at hand.
Right.
But Johnson and Garfield, they saw every job as an opportunity to practice excellence.
Exactly. And it's a powerful reminder that every task, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, can be an opportunity to cultivate our will to strengthen our character.
So it's not just about, presidents and historical figures.
Right.
The book also connects this idea to Steve Jobs' legendary attention to detail,
Oh, yeah.
even in the parts of his products that users would never see.
Jobs was really inspired by his father's craftsmanship. He believed in creating beauty and excellence in every aspect of his work. It wasn't about showing off. It was about this internal commitment to quality, that drive for perfection that ultimately made his products so exceptional.
So it's about having that inner compass, that unwavering commitment to doing our best, regardless of external validation or recognition.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the Stoic principle of focusing on what is in our control. Do you remember the Serenity Prayer?
Yeah, vaguely.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot, change the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yes, it's a beautiful prayer.
It so beautifully captures this idea that we can't control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we choose to respond.
Right.
And that choice, that ability to focus on what we can control, is at the heart of cultivating an unwavering will.
So how do we distinguish between what we can and cannot control?
Well, the Stoics had a phrase for this. Ta efemin. Ta uk efemin. Meaning, what is up to us, what is not up to us. Our emotions, our judgments, our creativity, our perspective, our desires, our decisions, our determination, those are all within our control.
Okay.
But the weather, the economy, other people's actions, global events, the stock market, those are outside our control.
Right. It's so easy to get caught up in worrying about those external
It's
factors.
so easy.
But it just drains our energy and prevents us from focusing on what we can actually influence.
Exactly. So when you're facing a challenge, a setback, an obstacle, the first question to ask yourself is this something I can control?
Okay.
If it is, then you can focus your energy on taking action, on finding a solution, on making a change.
Right.
But if it's not, then the key is to find a way to accept it, to let it go, and to shift your focus back to what you can control.
So it's not about giving up or becoming passive. It's about recognizing where your energy is best spent.
Exactly. And that brings us to one final thought from the book, and it's a powerful one. It's the importance of living in the present moment.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in worries about the future or regrets about the past. But those thoughts, they only distract us from the task at hand.
Yeah, they can be paralyzing.
The real power, the real strength lies in focusing on the present moment, on taking that next step, on doing what you can with what you have right now.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into the obstacles the way, I think it's important to remember these three disciplines we've explored: perception, action, and will. See the opportunity, take action, cultivate an unwavering will, and stay present. And by embracing this philosophy, by turning those obstacles into opportunities, you might be surprised by the strength and the resilience that you discover within yourself.
Absolutely. It's a journey worth taking.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everybody. We hope you found it insightful and empowering. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep turning those obstacles into opportunities.